Greetings, ladies and gentlefish, and welcome to this review of the IS, or JS, one of the Soviet Tier 7 heavy tanks. Now, historically, this thing was designed as a heavy tank, a breakthrough tank, that could mount a gun capable of duffing over a Tiger or a Panther tank from an effective combat range. And it was kind of the ultimate World War II Soviet heavy tank, really. Now, there were a whole bunch of different designs of heavy tank during the Second World War for the Soviets, as indeed for any other nation, but of the vehicles that were actually produced, this was kind of the pinnacle of the World War II vehicles, heavy tanks that is, for the Soviets. Now, in terms of the specification for this machine, as I already mentioned, it was designed as a heavy breakthrough tank, so it had to have a gun capable of taking down a Tiger or a Panther from a good combat range. And it was a replacement for the KV tanks that the Soviets had been using. I mean, the KV-1, for instance, quite famously. And one of the main complaints about the KV series of tanks, well, in the early cases, the guns were just no longer adequate. I mean, the KV-1 used a little 76mm gun that late war just didn't really cut it against a number of targets. But one of the main complaints was that they were slow and ponderous, so the IS was designed to be a relatively mobile machine. And while it was actually this machine was being developed, they ended up getting a choice between two different guns to mount on it, a choice between a 100mm gun and a 122mm gun. In reality, but essentially the 122mm gun is not actually in this game. There are a couple of different 122mm guns in this game, but basically the 100mm gun gave you better performance against armor. The shell penetrated more reliably thicker armor. However, the 122mm gun had a larger caliber and hence a far more effective high explosive round, and do bear in mind that in reality, most of the time when a tank's doing its thing, it's in support of infantry and they're shooting at soft targets, you know, gun emplacements or whatever, so a HE round is very important, having a good HE round. But also, the 100mm gun, which is the D10T or something, it's this one, the D10T, is in the game. The 100mm gun was a relatively new weapon, whereas the 122mm gun was just a modification of an existing field gun, and there were an abundance of them. And so a lot of the machines ended up going around with these 122mm guns. And historically, just to note, there's this opinion, and it's from, you know, people's opinion of history, but also how the vehicles are implemented in this game. There's this opinion that German machines were amazing snipers and that Russians were much better up close and personal. The 122mm gun historically on the IS had an accuracy comparable to the 88mm L71 gun found on the Tiger II. So that whole Germans are snipers, Russian are up close in your face and can't hit the broadside of a barn thing is complete codswallop, historically speaking. Of course, in the game, it's perfectly true. So, what is it in the game that you actually get? Well, this is the IS. I've been wiggling around with it for a little while. You get 1230 hit points, which for a Tier 7 heavy tank is decidedly mediocre. I mean, I think the lowest hit points for a Tier 7 medium is the AMX M4. Sorry, Tier 7 heavy, I mean. The AMX M4, I think, at 1200, and the most is the Tiger at 1500. But there's a big gap between the top few tanks and everybody else. So the Tiger gets 1500, I think the Black Prince and the KV3 both get 1450. Oh no, the KV3 gets 1400, I think the Black Prince gets 1450. And then there's a big drop off. And then you get to the T29, the IS, the IS2, and so on and so forth, and they all get 1200 and something. Between 12 and 1300. So, in terms of the mean, this is quite low, but in terms of like the modal or the median value, this isn't too shabby, but it's a very underwhelming amount of hit points. It's a 46-ton tank with a 700 horsepower engine, which means the power-to-weight ratio of this machine is actually not to be sniffed at. Top speed of 34 kilometers an hour, which again is not too bad for a heavy tank, and it will actually reach that speed under its own steam. Traverse speed of 35 degrees a second, again pretty good for a heavy tank. Compare that to the KV3, and you're at 32 degrees a second. And if we were quickly to go and have a look at the T29, I just picked that because I have it in my garage, that's down at 25. So this is, it turns relatively well. Now, of course, it's not just that raw number that you have to bear in mind. You get soft stats, ground resistance stats on the suspension, engine power, all this jazz. But it does turn relatively well. Hull armour, talk about this more in detail later, but on the hull, 120 at the front, 90 at the sides, 60 at the rear. On the turret, 100 at the front, 90 at the sides, 90 at the rear. So the turret is not the best armoured turret in the world. The armour on the turret is perfectly alright. We'll talk more about the gun performance in just a mo. Turret traverse 28 degrees a second, which is fine. View range 350 metres, which is absolutely abysmal. Signal range 625 metres. Coming back to that view range, this is typical of many mid-tier, mid to high-tier Soviet heavy tanks in particular. I'm just showing the IS-3. I mean, mine is stock, but that's down at 330 metres, just to give you a sake of comparison. KV-2, 330. The view range is utter garbage, which is one of the things that means that in the game you end up playing these tanks fast, aggressive, in your opponent's face, because you can't see for diddly squat. If someone... I had a subscriber replay not that long ago, courtesy of Mac, in his T71, where he managed to outplay a KV-4 and an IS-3 and a KV-2 simply by being able to see them and they couldn't see him. The view range on these tanks is utterly woeful. So, let's quickly talk about the gun selection on this thing. Now, this thing gets an awful lot of guns. And really we should compare quite a few of them, but in terms of the top gun, you get a choice between this D25T 122mm gun and this D10T 100mm gun. Which should you choose? Well, way back when, it was a very clear-cut choice, because the 100mm gun got lower alpha damage, the same penetration. It was more accurate, but still not that accurate. It aimed faster, but it still didn't aim particularly quickly, and the DPM wasn't fantastic, so the 122mm gun was the way to go. However, some patches ago, they changed the KV-1S. The KV-1S used to be a Tier 6 heavy tank, and they took it, and they turned it into the KV-1S at Tier 5, and the KV-85 at Tier 6. They nerfed the 122mm gun, and they buffed the 100mm gun, and that nerf did not carry over onto the 122mm gun on the IS, but the buff did carry over to the 100mm gun. So now this gun gets a better rate of fire. In my opinion, the 122mm, as frustrating as it can be, is still the best way to go, because that's much more in line with the way that the tanks on this tech line will play. And if you are finding that you want to use the 100mm gun on this tank, part of me would suggest that you question whether you actually want to be going down this tech line at all, because you're going to culminate with the IS-7, and the gun on the IS-7 is derpy as all hell. So, bear that in mind. Having said that, let's talk quickly about the grind to this machine. Now, you're going to notice an anomaly in my tech tree, and that's simply for the reasons, for alluding back to something that I just mentioned. So, in order to get to the IS, there are two different routes that you can choose. You start off, either way, at the MS1 here. Route number 1, this is the more obvious route. T26, it's an alright Tier 2 light tank, there isn't too much to say about it. The gun depression's not bad, it's not the fastest thing in the world, you don't have to spend long there. T46, it's a Tier 3 light tank. Many Tier 3 light tanks get a bit of a raw deal, but the T46 is one of the better machines there. T28, most people think it's garbage, I'm inclined to agree, but it does get a very good gun. It's also a medium tank that's the size of New Zealand. Then you get to the KV-1 at Tier 5. Now the KV-1, I will rebuy this one day and probably actually do a full review on it because it's one of the most influential tanks in the game. The KV-1 is the first tank on this tech line and one of the first tanks, or one of the lowest tier tanks in the game, to get serious armour. And it is a proper heavy tank. It is heavily armoured all over and it has an excellent gun selection. This is a very, very strong tank. Then, you used to go to the KV-1S at Tier 6, which is how it's how I progressed up this heavy tank line. But then they split the KV-1S up, as I mentioned, into a Tier 5 KV-1S and a Tier 6 KV-85. So now, in order to get to the IS via this route, you actually have to sidestep to the KV-1S, so play another Tier 5 machine. Now you're going to have most of the modules for the KV-1S already unlocked from the KV-1. Basically you get the same gun selection You just trade in some armour for better mobility. And if you compare the two Soviet heavy tank lines, you have the IS line, if you will, and the KV line, for want of a better phrase. The IS line, which is the one that the IS is on, surprise, surprise, is the more mobile of those tech lines, and the KV line is the slower, more heavily armoured one. So, you get to the KV-1S also at Tier 5, then you jump up to the KV-85 at Tier 6. I don't really have much of an opinion on this, other than it's very similar to the old KV-1S. But I haven't actually played it, so bear that in mind. And then you go to the IS at Tier 7. Alternatively, you can go via the medium tanks. So, if you're going to take this route, you go from the MS-1 and you go to any of the Tier 2 light tanks. Take your pick, because they all go to the same place. We've already talked about the T-26. So at Tier 3 you can then play T-70, BT-7 or T-46. Already mentioned the T-46. The T-70 and indeed the T-60 are kind of relatively slow in terms of light tanks, generic combat machines. They suffer when they're not top tier. When they are top tier, they're ridiculous. The T-70 when it's top tier is horrifically overpowered, but in a Tier 5 game it struggles because it's relatively slow. But from there you get to the T-80, which is is another light tank, but these tanks do not get scout matchmaking, they get regular matchmaking. So that might be of interest to you, and then you get to the T-34. The other option, BT-2 to BT-7, both of these are fast and mobile. A-20, again, does not get scout matchmaking anymore. And then you get to the T-34. It's relatively mobile, but not the most mobile tank in the world. Or T-46 up to T-50, that does get scout matchmaking, even though it's not as fast as it used to be, so it can be a bit of a meh tank. And then you get to the T-34, which I have a full review of anyway. From there, you can go to the T-34-85, again, I have a full review of that on my channel. Then the KV-13, again, I have a full review of that on my channel. And then you can sidestep, again, Tier 7 to Tier 7 to get to the IS. I've spent a bit of time talking about the various different routes to get to the grind to grind out to get to the IS, but the difference it makes is that you'll have different modules unlocked when you do finally get to the IS tank. So, when you get to the IS itself, you will not have the top engine because that gets unlocked on the IS and later on. Depending on what other tech lines you've played, you might have the top radio, but I mean, no one's really going to get excited about that. If you have come via the KV-85 and the heavy tanks, you will already have this 122mm gun, the D25T, unlocked. Not to be confused with the D25T, which is different, but you'll already have this gun unlocked. You will also... no, you won't, that's a lie. If you have come via the medium tanks, you will already have this 85mm gun unlocked. This 100mm gun you won't have unlocked from anywhere. So, yeah, there you have your choice, basically. You can either, and I mean, I actually played both before getting here. And so that meant I had both the 85mm gun and the 122mm gun unlocked, so I had the best of both worlds. But essentially, if you've gone the medium route, it means that your stock grind is fractionally better. If you take the heavy route, it means that your grind is better once you unlock this turret and the suspension in order to mount the big guns. Or you can do both, and both lines are full of good tanks. One thing I would note is that if you are coming from the KV-13, the research cost is less than coming from the KV-85, because you're going from a Tier 7 to a Tier 7 rather than a Tier 6 to a Tier 6. Which way would I suggest going? Well, as I say, you can try out both. But really, it's the heavy tank line that get, you know, the KV-1, KV-1S, KV-85 that prepares you a little bit better for the IS. But to be honest, either are valid routes that you might want to take. Anyway, however you get there, you then get to the IS. We've quickly talked about its stats and the grind. What else do you need to know about this thing? Well, you'll notice that I don't have the 100mm gun unlocked, just quickly. Why don't I have it unlocked? Very simply because I played the IS-2, the Chinese tank that this is very, very similar to. And the IS-2 I didn't find great with the 100mm gun, and I couldn't be bothered to grind out the 16,500 experience required to unlock this thing and then purchase it and mount it. Because later on, in one of the medium tech lines, I will get this gun for free anyway. Yes, free. It comes with a stock tank. So I had no interest in using this gun. I haven't really used it. It might actually be worth it since they buffed it, but So if anyone's used the IS with the 100mm gun and they want to report back, please feel free. I'd be interested to know what it's like. Anyway, what do you then do? Well, you probably want to know a little bit about equipment and crew skills. So, equipment that I would recommend. Well, this thing can't mount a vertical stabilizer because it's not American or British and it's at tier 7. If it could, you'd be all over it, but it can't. So, what do you want to mount? 1, you want a gun rammer because the reload time on this tank sucks. So gun rammer is your friend. It then starts getting a little bit debatable. Coated optics are a waste of time. You turn your garbage view range into an okay view range, but you're still not going to really outspot anybody. Binocular telescopes are a valid option because it takes your view range to something that's fairly, that's respectable. But whether you think it's worth taking it over the other options is up to you. Camo net, waste of time. Cyclone filter makes your engine more durable. I haven't noticed massive problems with engine damage, so I wouldn't recommend it. Enhanced gun laying drive you might want to take because the aim time on this gun is very, very long. We'll get to that in a second. If you use the 122mm gun, that is. So you might want to use the enhanced gun laying drive. Enhanced torsion, meh. Fuel tanks with CO2. I haven't actually had massive fire-related problems with this tank, which was nice, so I wouldn't bother. Heavy spall liner, wouldn't bother. Toolbox is an option. Wet ammo rack, wouldn't bother. Haven't noticed massive problems. Improved vents, yeah, maybe. It's just a boost all round. So my recommendation would be gun rammer, vents or gun laying drive, depending on what you think you can put up with. And then for your third equipment slot, either the other one, so vents or gun laying drive, or binocular telescopes or toolbox. Take your pick. Crew skills, commander, gunner, driver, loader, sixth sense on your commander, repairs on everyone else, basically. Would be how I would kit this tank up. So, let's just quickly talk about this Top Gun. I think this tank is all about the 122mm gun, so that's what I'm going to talk about. As I say, if you've got experience with the 100mm gun, by all means, let me know. Rate of fire 4.88, which is not particularly impressive. You're looking at a reload time without any equipment of 11 point something seconds. Average penetration, 175 with regular armor piercing ammo, which is okay. It's a bit lackluster for a tier 7 heavy, but it's alright. 217 with APCR premium ammunition, which is decidedly uninspiring. 390 alpha with both rounds. You do have a very nice high explosive round though, 530 alpha damage and 61 penetration. So if you find yourself in a hull down situation versus someone like a T29, you could always just snapshot HE at their turret and then run away. Dispersion at 100 meters is god-awful, 0.46. This is not a very accurate gun, and it takes 3 ice ages to aim. It's not a very accurate gun at all. Just quickly before talking about the armor scheme, this thing is inevitably going to be compared to the Chinese IS-2. They're very similar tanks. Which is better? The differences between the two are minor, to be honest. The IS-2 gets worse engine power, but it gets better ground resistance, and so I did not personally notice the mobility difference that much between the two tanks. The IS-2 gets a slightly better grind. It's a shorter grind, it's a simpler grind. The IS gets better gun depression. The IS gets better camo when stationary. The IS-2 gets better camo on the move. It's the hull armor on the IS is thicker, but the hull armor on the IS-2 is better angled. The differences are minor. They're basically the same tank. In pretty much every regard that matters, they're the same tank. One notable difference, the IS-2 gets a 250 penetration heat round as its premium ammo. Instead of 217 for APCR, but whatever. They're basically the same tank. They perform the same. I think the IS-2 is a fractional upgrade over the IS, but it's up to you. It doesn't really matter. They're both basically the same. Anyway, I have rambled on for way too long, so let's go and have a quick look at the armor scheme. Okay, so let's take a quick look at the armor scheme. Bazinga. So, rear armour is 90mm on the front rear of the turret, 60mm on the rear of the hull. It's not going to bounce anything, it will just make sure that you don't, generally speaking, get penetrated by most HE rounds pointed at you. The really big ones, like from a KV-2, will still pen the rear of this thing with some reliability though. Side of the hull, it's either 100 or 90 depending on where you're looking. If it's flat on, you're going to get penetrated. Side of the turret, 90, ditto applies. Front, we have 120mm upper plate, 100mm lower plate. There's this little bar of 120 here. 70mm on this sort of mid-plate thing, but that's well angled on the front of the hull. And then you've got these kind of little shoulder pauldrons that are 100mm thick or 120, depending on which bit you're referring to. But you can get some kind of silly bounces on those sections. So we're looking at these sections here. For the record. On the turret, well, it's 100mm thick, but you have areas where that's relatively flat. Even if you go into the gun mantler, I mean, this is nothing particularly to get too excited about. And of course, you've got a giant Great Commander's hatch on top. So, in short, this is not an amazing hull-down tank. The turret can and will be penetrated. In order to get much armour out of the hull, you have to do some serious angling. And then the shoulder pauldron becomes a weak spot here. You know, the bit that was relatively strong before, behind this kind of sheet thing, becomes a weak spot then, as it's only 100 or 120 odd millimeters thick. Your front starts getting some good angling on it, and your side can also get some good angling, especially when you include the tracks. In fact, if you want to side scrape out around a corner about this angle, you start getting some pretty impressive armor values on the side of this thing. So if you just turn the turret to like there, and even if you were side scraping around there, which is not a great angle, you'd have to do it a bit more shallow than that, you can start getting 160, 200mm auto bounce. So armor on this thing isn't the best, especially on the turret. I mean, you're not going to go hull down and beat everything that shoots at you, but it can side scrape out effectively, and considering this thing's relatively mobile, the armour is good enough for the purpose. Would also like to point out this machine gun port on the rear of the turret, not a weak spot. Well, it is and it isn't. It's not in as much as it's no weaker than the rest of the rear of the hull, but it is flatter, less well angled. But frankly, shooting at the rear of the turret, you're probably going to penetrate it. And that is it for the armour scheme on the IS. So let's go and take a look at some gameplay. Here we go with game number 1. You can see the matchmaking is a bit of a mixed bag here. On the one hand, we're top tier, which is definitely good, but on the other hand, this is Malinovka, which is not the best map for the IS, but it's Encounter, so, I mean, hopefully we should be able to have, and since they changed this map a few patches back, with any luck we should be able to have a nice brawl up on the top of the hill. The IS does really like its engagements close range. So we're going up here with a selection of other people from our team, including a Panther M10. You don't see many of those around. In fact, I recently bought one. I wanted to get it as it was being taken out of the gift shop, and despite the fact that I'd heard it was a pretty dubious tank, I don't know, I like it. I like the look of it. I've wanted to have one for quite some time, so I took the opportunity to pick one up. Now, a lot of Tankers team are making the classic mistake of stopping... A lot of Tankers team? Sorry. I've just been recording subscriber replay, as you may or may not have noticed. A lot of our team, my team, are making the classic mistake of stopping up on that hill and trying to trade it out with the enemy team. What's wrong with that? Often, the enemy team will have a light tank in a position to spot you, and especially if you just give them shots into your side, you're just going to get murdered up there. And so far, our Panther M10 has been reduced to not a fat lot of health, and we've lost our Type 58. Try and get myself in a position to have a shot at this AMX. We bounce each other. I bounce on him, he bounces on me. Whatever. And then I should really get into some cover, but I'm being stupid and greedy. Thankfully, the shot from the Type 58 goes into my tracks, and with 128mm of penetration, that Type 58 is going to find it a non-trivial task to actually damage me in any meaningful way. That's not going to stop him trying, though. And it's not going to stop him losing an awful lot of his health in the attempt. And there you can see what 390 alpha damage means at tier 7. It means that tier 6 medium tanks are dead in 2 shots, like that. It's a very nice amount of alpha damage to have. There's a T-34-85 up there. There's also this M6, who has a better chance of penetrating me than did the Type. And indeed, it looks like he manages to. I might have given him a little bit too much of my side armour there. Just going through my nice long reload. These guys are letting me reload though, which is terribly nice of them. And AMX takes out the M6. Those guys really should have come round to rush me while I was reloading and put some damage into me, but they didn't. And now they're just going to die. Again, just waiting on my reload. I even managed to detonate that guy's ammo rack. So that's a Type 58 dead and a T-34-85 dead. Not too bad. And we've evened the scoreline up at 4 kills apiece again. So now that we've won the brawl on the hill, it's actually kind of awkward, because there's often a lot of enemy people camping, well, down where that SU-100 is. And I have neither the view range, the armour, nor really the gun for this kind of engagement. And so I try and find some other people to shoot at, because I really don't want to plough down that hill straight into the enemy team. Now, there is an ARL-44 coming up the hill, who I could, however, do the business on, and there's a Type 58 over there, but oh, this is looking bad, as the enemy tanks push into our machines, who are by the castle. Now, you'll notice a reasonable amount of our team, say 4 team members, have gone toward the field, which is a problem. So I'm just trying to find an effective shot on that Panther, which I do, and even set him on fire for good measure. The problem with going to the field is that, well, you have to push if you're going to do it. You have to be aggressive. If you don't, and you do what certainly the Dicamax and the Chaffee did there and just sit there, what you're effectively doing is taking your tank out of the game, which is not helpful for your team. So, there's the enemy Chaffee. And you can see the people who are on the field are just getting obliterated now. Managed to take the Chaffee out for kill number 3, and oh dear. Now there's just 2 of us on the hill, and 2 people who have gone down into the field. Make of that 1 of us on the hill, and 2 people who have gone down into the field. I think you can see the way this game's probably going to go. So there's an 87 over there. If we're careful about the engagement, we can certainly take out an 87, and if we're not careful about the engagement, he can certainly take us out. Which is fair enough, we're both tier 7 tanks. The 87 is a little frustrating because in most places it has enough armour to bounce this gun, which means you have to be careful with your shots and actually aim them. And also, it has the gun to go straight through this tank, and like that. I was a bit lucky with that shot to penetrate it. But also, it has the health pool to soak up quite a bit of damage, which is all kind of irritating. So, lining this shot up at the commander's hatch, he bounced a shot, I missed mine. You know, I can't really blame it for missing. I mean, I got lucky with the shot earlier on. Again, lining up another shot on the commander's hatch, and if I can be in a position like this, the 87 will find it very difficult to find shots on me. Looks like the 87 is going to try and engage me though. That's not a good shot. So just waiting for him to come around the corner. He gives me shots into his commander's tower, which I take. Might take a hit here. Indeed I do. And now I'm going to move up to the wreck in front of me. Oh god, there's a comet behind me as well. Move up to the wreck in front of me and I should be able to finish off this AT-7. I would like to side scrape around this wreck instead, but the presence of a comet behind me is really not making that an option. I don't have the repair kit to repair this track, and I don't think I have the reload to kill the guy before he finishes me off. And that was the Comet's Radley Walters medal. Actually quite cheap Radley Walters medal. Anyway. That was the game from my perspective. There's still a T-20 and a Hellcat left, but they die. So what did we get there? The armour is good enough to bounce some shots, but you can't rely on it to bounce everything. The mobility is not too bad. The gun's kind of derpy, but hits really hard. The gun depression is dubious. The view range isn't very good. Basically, what you saw there is the IS. That kind of gives you a feeling for what this tank is like. Now, we were top tier here, which is great, but conversely, the map wasn't the best for this tank, so a bit of swings and roundabouts. Have a look at the post-battle results, and then we'll jump into game number 2, where, as usual, we are at the bottom of the feeding pool. Okay, here we are with game number 2. As promised, we're at the bottom of the feeding pool, and actually the matchmaking would struggle to be much worse, as it's not only a tier 9 game, so we're the small fish, we're also on Prokhorovka. Is it Prokhorovka or Fiery Salient? No, this is actually Prokhorovka, for all the difference it makes. Which is a very open map. It favours tanks with gun depression, mobility, view range, and the IS certainly lacks the gun depression and the view range. Generally speaking, heavy tanks don't like this map, especially when there's artillery on the enemy team, and one of the artillery on the enemy team, and indeed on our team, is very large indeed. Also, for some reason, the enemy has a tier 6 artillery piece and an E25. Oh, the T-37 dragged them into this game. Oh well. Anyway, so I'm going to go and fight it out on the hill. Now, in games like this, you're very unlikely to be the deciding factor in your game. You're unlikely to be the one who carries your team to victory. It's possible, but it's much harder when you're bottom tier. You're far more like... But by the same token, if you pull your weight, if you do your part, then obviously you help your team to win. And if all the lower tier tanks do their part, then it reduces the pressure and reliance on your top tier tanks to do all the heavy lifting and all the carrying. So, going up to to the hill here, because on the hill, hopefully we can try and reduce the engagement range. And this tank is not a sniper, so reducing the engagement range is generally speaking a good thing. So there's me, T-54, T-54E1, so that's half of our tier 9s, and an AMX 5100, okay. So 2 auto-loaders. And if you actually look at the armor profiles of the tanks, it's probably the T-54 is the machine with the best armor of the lot of us. But there we go. The T-54E1's armor tends to be quite patchy. As a T-54, I wasn't able to load and put shots into his side. I get spotted, I pull back, but I put a shot into him as I do so. I didn't expect it to penetrate, but I thought, why not, I'll give it a go. So, this guy is now tracked, trying to aim a shot at his lower plate. But, no. If that did hit, it bounced, or it may even have gone completely below his tank. E75 is saying fall back. Ooh, we have something with a bit of armor up here now. So, okay, I will fall back, that's fine. And this is not a bad start. The enemy T-54, or one of the enemy T-54s, and they are platooned, and there's the other one, has taken a bit of a battering. Alas, our T-54 just got artilleried, and lost a chunk of his health in the process. So the E75 is just rolling forwards and really taking this guy's attention, which gives the rest of us an opportunity to move forward. And I think I take a blind shot here on the basis that why not? Yeah, I do. And then I actually pull back. Oh, I thought I was going to move forward. Oh well. Artillery slams the T-54. And there's also a T-28 prototype over there to our left. And there's the T-54 trying to do the business on our E-75, but the T-54E1 on our team, God, there's too many T-54s of various descriptions in this game. The T-54 on our team auto-loads him in the bum and makes him go away. E-75 just lost 900 health. Looking at what's on the enemy team, that's either a ridiculously high damage roll from the ISU-152 or possibly the Borsig, although the ISU has more penetration, or, more likely, that's enemy artillery. T-28 prototype. Looks like that shot hit. Now, this gun is, and this tank is really not designed for sniping, but I will take those shots, I guess, if the opportunity presents itself, and I can do so without seriously endangering our chances of winning the game. Edging forwards up to this bush now. The view range on the IS is not very good, but I do have binocular telescopes on this because it's my standard grinding equipment, so hopefully we can actually get a bit of view range over here. Flanking shots into an IS-3. There's an IS behind him who's now dead. And there we go. A nice chunk of damage to the side of the IS-3. Ooh, knocked over that tree, which was a bit of a mistake. Don't have shots on the IS-3 anymore, though he is dead. Oh, that was a near miss. That artillery shot, because I haven't been spotted, I assume was actually aimed for the E-75. We bounce on the side of the KV-4. And now I actually get spotted. So, time to run away like the brave Sir Robin that I am. T-29 gets taken out by our T-54. And so far, this game is going alright. Now, we've got 3 of our team's top-tier tanks up here, and of course the 4th of those machines is artillery. So there is a certain element of pressure on us to not fanny around and just get a move on and apply pressure to the enemy team. Now, once again, there was an artillery shot directed for the E-75, took off like 500-600 of the guy's health, but also splashed me into the bargain, which is annoying. So, our T-54 is going for it. We have to back him up. It looks like the AMX has had exactly the same thought. We've got to back this guy up. We can't let him go alone. And I think, do I take a blind shot? No, apparently I don't. I have, however, just been spotted. ISU puts a shot into the T-54, and there's the T-28 prototype from earlier on. Is he giving us shots into his side? Of course he is, because it apparently hasn't occurred to him that that might be a terrible idea. That shot looked like it went very high, but alas, the prototype has taken out our 5100. Our T-54, however, should have the better of the engagement with their T-54, unless that ISU intervenes. Oh, he manages to kill the enemy T-54, but the ISU does intervene anyway. Trying to get a shot on the enemy ISU. He's backing off, backing off, backing off. Hopefully my shot doesn't go into that gun mantlet. No idea off the top of my head if that hit or not, but our artillery finishes him off. And we're winning 7-4. And we've actually done alright. In fact, our Tiger P hasn't even connected, so when this game, at the beginning of this game, it was actually 14 plays 15. Alright, admittedly, that was a bottom tier tank that hadn't connected, so it wasn't as bad, but even so. Alright, so this area appears to now be clear, although there is obviously still that T-28 prototype over there somewhere, who indeed nails our T-54. Oh, he just took a hit. Take a shot, but I think that missed. So I'm going to go and try and light up that prototype for our E-75 to shoot. I can take, well, it'll take the prototype 3 shots to kill me. He can't kill me in 2 unless he sets me on fire or detonates my ammo rack. Oh no, but apparently I'm going to sit behind a bush. You see, I honestly can't actually remember this bit of the game that well. Oh, there we go. Now I go for it. Yeah, I thought I went for it at some point. I have been spotted. T-28's probably going to shoot me. So I'm trying to wiggle. Trying to use terrain to my advantage to hide as much of my tank as I can. Ouch. Okay. There we go. Now he's spotted. Oh, that's a shot at his front. Screw that. So I just keep going and hope that... Ooh, we managed to dodge that shot. And hope that my team kills this guy. Like, now. Please. Pretty please. Ow. There we go. GW Panther steps up to the mark. Even if the prototype does damage my ammo rack. So that just leaves the enemy artillery, the 212A. And you see I say in chat, thank you, Artie. And we're just going to go for this guy. This game's sewn up. It's won. Nice team performance. And where is he? Well, I haven't been spotted, so I assume he's over in the A1-A2 corner. And he probably doesn't have any sort of view range enhancing equipment. Not that I blame him for that, but, you know, I do. So I'm just going to force him to come out of his little hole and do something by sitting in the capture circle. I'm not sitting next to any of that terrain, because that's kind of an obvious place to be. There's the 212, put a shot into him and he dies. There we go. So I was trying to sit in the open instead, but there we are. Game over. We ended up doing an alright amount of damage, getting some assistance damage into the bargain, and actually coming second on our team. which was nice. So again, have a look at the post-battle results, and then we will jump back into the garage just to round things off a bit, as per usual. So just to round things off, what do I think about this tank overall? Honestly, I think it's a bit uninspiring. Its mobility is fairly nice for a heavy tank. The armor's okay. One of the defining features of it is that 390 alpha damage. Without that 390 alpha damage, the IS would be a very underwhelming machine, and that's why I think you should use the 122mm gun. I don't really think the 100 cuts it on this machine, but I could be wrong, as I say. Feel free to let me know about your experiences with the 100mm if you've used it. This is not the best tier 7 heavy tank, but it's also not the worst in my opinion. The best by far and away is the T29, and the worst is probably the AMX M445. If you were to compare this with its stablemate, the KV3 I think has more monster games because it has that armor that with good matchmaking allows it to really carry very hard. The IS is, in my opinion, a more consistent performer and suffers less due to the matchmaker. I think the IS is all round a better machine than the KV3. Am I keeping this? God, no. This 122mm gun just drives me spare. And I would rather be playing a T29 at the end of the day. So I have already moved my crew across into the IS-3 here. This is a stock IS-3, which is a rather painful experience. I've almost got... Oh, I'm trying to grind out the XP for the gun first, aren't I? Yeah, so I'm not keeping it, but it's certainly not a bad machine, and a lot of people like it. I mean, if you look at my stats in this thing, what have we got? 53% win rate overall. I had a pretty terrible start to it, but the win rate picked up later on. So 53%, it's on my average, so whatever. I've got an ace tanker, I've got 2 marks of excellence, 10 high calibers, tank sniper of all things, 3 steel walls. You know, it's alright. As you can see, they're 2 marks of excellence during the grind. It's not that bad a tank, as I say, it's alright, but not fantastic. You know, wouldn't kick it out of bed, but you certainly wouldn't invite it. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed that, or found vaguely informative, that wee little rundown of the IS. If you did, please feel free to catch some of my other videos and or subscribe to my channel. And I wish you very happy hunting on that battlefield. Ciao, ciao.